Hello everybody and welcome back to our lecture series. I am Ted, your host, and for this lecture we're going to continue right where we last left off. In our last lecture we were looking at the Diocletian's reforms. We were right in the middle really of examining the effect of his reforms. And the immediate effect of Diocletian's reforms during his reign was the elimination of the endemic civil wars, and of course the curbing of the German incursions. And those two events, stopping those two, stopping the endemic civil wars, and finally putting a stop to the Germanic invasions or incursions, those two events went a long way to restoring the confidence in the Roman economy. But the inflation remained. So Diocletian issued a new gold coin to counter the inflation and to restore trust in imperial currency, the solidus, or the solid bit as it was known. He issued that coin, and in 301 Diocletian also issued a document known as the Price Edict, which detailed the allowable prices of goods and services within the Roman Empire. Now, this was not very successful outside of areas of direct government control. In places where government officials were weak, this list didn't really have any effect. Diocletian also attempted to repair the image of the emperor, which, because of the high turnover rate during the 3rd century, had been severely degraded. He explicitly linked the person of the emperor to the gods for the first time. This wasn't a new strategy. They had been somewhat affiliated with the gods, but Diocletian, he explicitly linked the imperial person with the gods of the Roman pantheon. Caesar Augustus, he had himself, along with his adopted father Julius Caesar, he had the pair of them deified. He had himself and his adopted father deified. He often went by the name Dewey, by Felix D, that is the Son of God, and this is another sort of play on names that Christians or attributes that the Christians would later adopt. One of the more well-known names or titles of the Christian Messiah is of course the Son of God, and that was something that Caesar Augustus referred to himself as after he had Julius Caesar deified. But from now on, the Roman emperors themselves began to liken themselves to the gods, and they began to position themselves to reign like the Egyptian Nisuts or of the other royal dynasts who begin to emulate this Egyptian practice. We first see god kings in Egypt, and then we see god kings in the Near East as they begin to compete with one another for prestige. We have to remember that the Achaemenid kings, that kings like the Darius the First and Xerxes, they ruled as god kings, and now we see the Roman emperors adopting this very Eastern Mediterranean practice, instituting it into the Western, really the Central Mediterranean world. But the Roman emperors are in the 3rd century, and really this is the 4th century, in the 300s. They're adopting this god king persona, this god king role. And the emperors, they begin to depict themselves on their coins with a burst of light around their head. And this is also something that the Christians will copy. They copy this convention of placing the halo around the head of their god and their principal religious figures, what we would call the saints. Diocletian, he also improved the trapping of the imperial ceremony. At his court, he is the first he's the first Roman emperor, the first emperor to wear a golden cloak, or to have his attendants address him as their lord. Now, an unintended consequence of this reform was that any religious challenge to the gods was tantamount to treason. Political unity in Rome was now tied to religious unity in a way. Now, Diocletian began to discourage the persecution of deviant religious cults he began to encourage, I should say, the persecution of deviant religious cults. And this would mean the Christians, first and foremost, within the Roman Empire. Now, we have not gone into any great detail regarding Christianity in our historical narrative up until this point, because really, up until this point, the Christians were not key figures in any of the history that we've been discussing. They at this point, Christianity only had a very minuscule circle of adherents. It was one of hundreds of obscure religious cults within the Roman Empire. Christianity, however, would during the next 100 years rise to become the official religion of the neighboring Aksumite Empire and later on the Roman Empire. Now, to understand the rise of Christianity and the conflicts that the Christians generated, we must first back up and examine the differences between Christianity and the other religions of the Roman Empire. Now, the two standard components of the other religious traditions were polytheism and a very public nature. The other religions believed that there were a number of legitimate gods, and this number was not defined. So literally, there could be hundreds and thousands of legitimate gods. And the Romans were quite open and accepting of other gods. They frequently added the gods of subject peoples into their own pantheon. Within the Roman Empire, the Roman gods were afforded, however, a higher status and worshipped officially as ceremonies of state, as compared to the other gods, the other cults of the Roman Empire. Now, within the empire, individuals, even groups, worshipped particular gods. Gods like Mars, Altor, Mithras, and of course Isis. They were even allowed to worship a set of gods like the Theban Trinity or the Olympic gods. Christianity, like Atonism, was rigidly monotheistic. The Christians espoused their beliefs and their belief in one God and only one God. Christianity was also more privately focused at the time. The Christians tended to worship indoors, which was suspicious. Everybody else worshipped outdoors. The Christians worshipped indoors, exclusively indoors. They concentrated on the personal relationship they had with their God. The older religions, they always held public services, and they associated their services with festivals and with other public ceremonies. Now, the differences between Christianity and all the other religions made the Romans suspicious. Another difference between Christianity and a number of the other religions and cults was that Christianity had a collection of sacred texts grouped into testaments. The testament will become these testaments will be grouped together into a Bible, and a Bible is not a religious document or a religious book in and of itself. What makes the Christian Bible or the Jewish Bible sacred is the fact that the collection of books within their Bible, are of a religious nature. So it's not so much the Bible itself that is sacred, but the works in the Bible. The Bible is simply a collection of written works. And it just so happened that the religious works are of a sacred religious nature. Now, these Christian texts, help to define what the Christians believed. Now, after the crucifixion of Jesus or Yeshua, however you like to pronounce his name or define him, Christianity spread slowly. First, through the preaching of his 12 disciples, they would be Simon, later known as Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, James again, Thomas, another Simon, Jude, and of course Judas Iscariot. Now, Judas Iscariot, he is the disciple noted for his betrayal of Jesus, and he was after his After his suicide, he was replaced by Matthias. Matthias was chosen by the remaining 11 to join their ranks. After these men, the figure of Saul, later known as Paul, dominates early Christianity. And Paul is noted for his campaign against early Christian leaders, his subsequent adoption of Christianity, and ministering to everyone who would listen. Those are what he's really noted for. Now, there are a number of aspects that help Christianity spread. One, it emphasized morality and good behavior. It offered a reward of immortality after death to its followers. Christianity also did not recognize the existing hierarchies of Roman society. Early Christians practiced a very broad equality. A slave could be the equal of a Roman patrician. That's the type of equality that existed in early Christianity. The Romans had recurring problems with Jews and Christians because of their monotheism. Now, the Romans could not understand the Christian insistence on only worshiping their one God. The Romans were puzzled by the secrecy associated with the Christians. They did not like the closed religious services. And the Romans were troubled by the equality within Christianity. It made slaves, women, and non-citizens the equals of Roman citizens, even Roman patricians. Now, the main issue of Christianity concerned the deification of the Roman emperors and the cults devoted to living emperors. It became customary for all citizens or inhabitants of the empire to offer a toast to the emperors. This is a recurring feature even within contemporary society. Those familiar with the loyal toast know that it is a toast to the health and the continued well-being of the British sovereign. The Romans, inhabitants of the Roman Empire were. It was customary. It was expected that you would, toast to the emperor's good health on his birthday, especially, along with offering a prayer to the aspect of his person that may one day become divine. This was expected of everyone. Those who did not do this, they were viewed as traitors. And something that was political to the Romans became a very serious religious matter to the Christians. The Jews were exempt. Pompey, during his settlement of the East, he had during Pompey and Caesar's settlements in the East with the Jews, they had been granted religious exemptions because they stressed their monotheism and they made all of the necessary concessions to these Roman big men. So this very political matter, it's a very religious matter to the Christians. This miscommunication resulted in the persecution and death of Christians who refused to offer prayers to the emperor's spirit, to the portion of his spirit that may one day become divine. Under Diocletian, unity became vital. There was no margin for dissent. In 299, the Christians became actively persecuted on an empire-wide basis. Diocletian retired shortly after all of this, after initiating all of this. He retired, and he could rest assured that he had done a great deed, that he had saved the empire by enacting his reforms. Now, Diocletian is also remarkable and also notable as being the only Roman emperor to retire. He spent the rest of his life living in a palace in modern-day Croatia. Now, under Diocletian, disaster had been averted, but the old tensions and stresses, they remained. Early in the 4th century, they reared their heads again as rivals continued to compete for imperial primacy. One of the contenders to the throne was a man named Constantine. He was a long shot. He had won a couple of crucial battles, and he grew powerful. Now, Constantine had a special tool for encouraging his troops before key battles. He would claim to have had a vision from a god, promising his men victory. He did this with Apollo, the Greek sun god, and he associated himself with the Greek god thereafter. In 312, Constantine marched against the city of Rome, and he fought a battle that was destined to determine the next emperor and the course of Roman history for the next couple hundred years. The site that he was to fight his battle was the Milvian Bridge. This is the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. And now Constantine was a long shot in this battle. The odds were against him. His troops were tired, they were outnumbered, and worse, their morale was low. Now, right before the battle, Constantine comes to his men, and he claimed to have had another vision and more dreams. In this dream, the Christian God comes down to him and promises Constantine victory in the battle to come. Now his men, then after hearing this story, they paint an early Christian symbol onto their shields. The men, newly inspired, go out and they win the battle, and Constantine then issues a decree that Christianity is to be tolerated. He doesn't proclaim that Christianity is the state religion, just that Christianity is to be tolerated. Now, at the time, Christians represented less than 10% of the empire's total population. Constantine's understanding of Christianity and Christianity's doctrine remained shaky. He subsidized pagan temples throughout his reign. He supplied sacrifices to the temples, and he continued to worship Apollo, the Greek god of the sun. Constantine also had a very inflated view of himself as the head of the Christian church. This is at a time before there was any sort of organized state church. This is at a time before there were before church structure and doctrine took the form that we know of it had today. Constantine's reforms really shaped and still largely shapes the positions and the outlook and the organization of the Christian churches. Constantine, he would routinely summon the various bishops to meetings, and he presided over their meetings as their Lord and their Master. And he built a church that contained statues of the 12 apostles, of the 12 disciples of Christ. And in the center, he left the spot for himself. He viewed himself as the 13th disciple. From this point on, with the exception of one, all subsequent Roman emperors would be Christians. One appeal for the emperors to convert to Christianity and to support Christianity was that it offered a belief and an adherence to one true God that could be used to bolster and support the belief that there is only one true emperor. Another major development for the Romans was the division of the empire into eastern and western halves, with separate emperors for both halves. An acknowledgement of this new reality, Constantine founded a new city to serve as the capital of the Eastern Empire, a city that he named Constantinople after himself. Now, this new imperial capital was equipped with most of the features of Rome, including a senate building, chariot racing hippodrome, a palace, and of course a grain dole. Now, just like Augustus, Constantine then claimed to have saved or restored the Republic. Constantine claimed to to save all that the Romans held dear. Now, after the reign of Constantine, most people just sort of end any discussion, any discourse on Roman history. It is generally believed to have simply withered on the vine after Constantine, and that's because of two of the most controversial questions that surround Roman history, and those two questions are: when did the Roman Empire fall, and why did the Roman Empire fall? All of the reasons, well, not all, but most of the reasons come after the reign of Constantine. And they very quickly affect the western half of the Roman Empire. Now, these two questions, when did the Roman Empire fall and why did the Roman Empire fall, they continue to be heatedly debated by historians and lay people to this very day. From this point on in this lecture, we're going to go on and we're going to go and we're going to examine those two questions. We will have to navigate through some tough realities, namely the fact that nobody agrees on the exact date of the fall of the Roman Empire. Many different historians have put forth their opinions. They put forth theses. Now, one frequently cited date is 68. It's the year 68 and the death of Nero. The idea here is that the settlement of Augustus hinged on a Julio-Claudian successor, and another date is 180 with the death of Marcus Aurelius. And the date of 180 is appealing because it draws attention to the golden age of the Roman Empire, the period of the 5 good emperors. This is also the date favored by writers and filmmakers, since no great works of literature or film focuses on Roman history after 180. The civil wars of the 3rd century is another date favored because they hint at the instability that had become commonplace in the Roman Empire. It also hints at the role of these strongmen, these military emperors who seize power or attempt to seize power at every opportunity. Now, another popular date is the year 312, when Constantine converted to Christianity. Now, proponents of this date stress that the adoption of Christianity signaled a breaking down of the old Roman vigor, and that old Roman vigor was what was needed to preserve and maintain the Roman Empire. Now, the next set of dates all concern barbarian peoples, namely Germans. And the Germans we have discussed were semi-nomadic peoples who were moving from area to area after they had exhausted the soil. They were associated in loose tribal groupings. Now, the Germans were not engaged in extensive or intensive agriculture or even building cities. Their economies were settled around herding cattle. During the 4th century, the Germans began to coalesce, merging smaller clan-based units into larger units. These units, they then began to migrate out of their ancestral homes. These larger units then began to form confederations, which numbered into the tens of thousands. Now, the Germans, while still a threat to Roman security, they were not the most dangerous groups roaming around. The Huns were the most dangerous barbarian group of this time, and the Huns were true nomads. They rode these sturdy little Central Asian horses. They fought almost exclusively from horseback, and their primary weapon was a very tough, powerful bow. They lived in a very tough, brutal society that was centered around raiding and attacking their neighbors. Now, the Huns were capable of covering vast distances on those little ponies. They also boasted of a very fearful appearance. The best attribute of the Huns were their skills as warriors, and in battle, they were known to just be an absolute nightmare, an absolute terror. In one particular battle with the Visigoths, 300 Huns killed 1,100 Visigoths while suffering only 17 casualties. They were ferocious. They were so ferocious that people, upon hearing that the Huns were approaching, they simply moved away. They did not want to deal with the Huns. Now, the Huns are thought to be either descendants of or the same group known as the Qiongnu. And now the Qiongnu were a group of Central Asian nomads who had earlier threatened China. Now, this topic is hotly debated as well because our sources on these two peoples are scant. So we cannot make any definitive statement either way. We cannot say conclusively that the Huns are or are not the Qiongnu. The two were remarkably similar, And by the late 300s, the Huns had shifted their attentions. They shifted their attention, and they began to move out of Central Asia, and they set off a colossal domino effect that impacted the Western and the Eastern Roman empires. The Huns invaded the lands of the Ostrogoths. Then the Huns invaded the lands of the Visigoths, pushing both groups towards the borders of the Roman Empire. Now, the emperors were unable to repel the displaced Germans in their weakened states, and the empires were forced to come to terms with these Germans, exchanging land in exchange for military service. Now, these accommodations often broke down due to miscommunications on both sides. In 378, the Ostrogoths rebelled against the Eastern Emperor due to their mistreatment. The Eastern Romans had began to force the the Ostrogoths, to sell their children into slavery. When they were hungry, the Romans sold them dog meat and forced them to eat this dog meat. They humiliated the Ostrogoths at every turn. And the emperor at the time was a man named Valens. And when the Ostrogoths rebelled, Valens wrathfully rushed out to meet the Ostrogoths, in battle. He did so without waiting for reinforcements, and in the ensuing battle, Valens lost his army and his life at the Battle of Adrianople. Now, 378 is often cited as the date that the Roman Empire fell, and it's cited because of Valens' defeat at Adrianople. Adrianople was just a complete disaster for the Eastern Empire. It also exposed the weakness of the Roman legions at this point, and the ascending power of the barbarian tribes, the German tribes, and the Huns. This period also saw the territorial erosion of the Eastern and the Western empires, had various Germanic tribes moved in and carved out pieces of territory for themselves. The Vandals, the Germanic Vandals, and the Vandals are a tribe, they're a Germanic tribe. They cross over into the empire, they conquer Spain, and then they crossed into North Africa, and they migrate toward the city of Carthage, and they eventually just become pirates. They become pirates in the Western Mediterranean, and they began to threaten Rome by cutting her off from her breadbasket provinces. Now, the core of the empire remains intact, however, and but in 406, the Rhine River freezes over. The entire not the entire, but large sections of the river freezes over, and this allowed for entire German tribes like the Alans and the Vandals and the Suevi, to cross over from Germania into the Gallic provinces. In 410, a band of Visigoths storm into Italy, and they actually capture and they sack Rome. Now, by this time, Rome was not the capital of the empire anymore. Constantinople was the capital of the Eastern Empire, and Ravenna was the capital of the Western Empire. The sack of Rome wasn't really a political disaster from Rome, since it didn't threaten the emperor's person. The sack of Rome was still a pretty still a pretty shocking event, and it was really made even more shocking because the emperor in the West, he refused to march to defend Rome, and he refused to send any forces to relieve the city. The sack of Rome by these Visigoths was the first time in 800 years that the city had been taken by force. By force from a foreigner. The leader of the Visigoths, Alaric, he brokered a deal with the senators still in the city to peacefully loot the city and then withdraw. It was a major psychological boon for the Germans and the Huns. The Huns were watching this, and they were learning, they were waiting patiently. The sack of Rome by Alaric and the Visigoths, it echoed the decline of Roman capability to defend her city and her provinces. And with that, we'll break, and when we come back, we'll examine the further calamities of the Roman Empire during this period. And in particular, we'll look at Attila the Hun. As always, hit like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know what you thought about this lecture, and I'll see you guys next time for another lecture.